All right, let's get this show going. Come on in, guys. Have a seat. Welcome. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful, hot day in Calgary. 30 degrees, I think it got up to. So, our hats off to you for taking this time out of your busy evening to learn about people skills and relationships. A very important part of life. I'm really fired up about this one, because this is part 2 for people skills and relationships, which we're going to get deeper into some, how do you deal with difficult people, as Rick Warren calls them, crazy makers. So, like I say, welcome. Lesson 10 to Launch Class. So we commend you for coming, and we're here for you. We are your coaches, as you can see. It says Coach Al here, and the other coaches have a similar name tag. And so we're here for you. We believe in you. And we're trying to teach what we wish we knew when we were young adults like you are, coming up. And some things that they typically don't teach in school or at home or church. So it's all about you, and help us to help you fill in that little survey in terms of what topics you think you'd find useful. And we're going to refer to this, the 7 areas in this diagram in 1 sec. And last time we talked about, which I guess is 3 months ago, we've had this break because of COVID. 3 months ago we talked about strategies for a winning life, which was lesson 9. And today is people skills and relationships part 2. And we're excited about it. There's a lot of power-packed information here. And if you reference some of the study material before the class, you'll have an idea about that. So, by way of introduction, one of the foundational principles of Launch Class is this little life choices diagram, which came from a men's group that some of us were part of. And it talks about the 7 areas of life, and the idea is we want to have some confidence, some skill, some success in all 7 areas in order to have a good sense of what we're really after. Lasting peace, happiness, confidence, fulfillment. In other words, it's between our ears, kind of what we're after, right? Sometimes we will pursue a car, a relationship, stuff, a vacation, and we think that's going to provide these things. And we find out it doesn't. Not in a lasting way. We're not going to have these unless we have, like the topic of today, healthy relationships. So this relationships thing is foundational. 7 areas. Family, obviously relationships are there. Social relationships are there. Career relationships are there. In other words, it affects all aspects of our life. I know when I came up, I did not have any teaching in this area. Fortunately, my mom was good with people when I was a kid, so I had a good example. But most people, I don't think, even have that. Particularly in how to deal with conflict. So this diagram here, here's you or me, and we have choices that we make in life. And we can turn left and avoid the problems, or we can turn right and go towards the problem. And we also have life squeezing us. Problems squeezing us down, God pushing up, trying to encourage us in the right direction, and we can turn right or left. In this case, this is a really good example for today's lesson, because if we have relational challenges, guess what? We're not going to be happy, first of all. We know that. If we turn left and avoid the problem, we'll have temporary, fun, food, pleasure, etc., wasting time. We'll have some fleeting, happiness, if you will, but not good, not good. So, Launch Class is partly about encouraging us to turn right, move towards the problem. God will meet us there. God will help us. We call this the corridor of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That's why we would avoid it. But we're here to encourage you that with us as coaches, with some good teaching, God as well, we can, you can, we can all have good success in all 7 areas. The Bible promises that, and we as coaches promise you that you can have good success in all 7 areas. So that's the concept of the life choices diagram. See if this technology works. Hey, bonus. Okay, why talk about people skills and relationships? We touched on a few ideas so far, but they affect all aspects of our life. Particularly the thing helping us to get things what we really want, which is the lasting peace, confidence, happiness, fulfillment. That's why we would want to have better people skills and relationships. If we'd like to help others or be successful, we need to have confidence in this area. Makes sense? But don't fear. Don't worry about it. I was shy as a kid. I did not have confidence in this area. I promise you that. And if you went and watched the original part 1 of People Skills and Relationships, I talk a little bit about my story there. So don't worry about not being confident. There's things we can learn, approaches we can take that'll help us to have better success. So if we'd like to help others or to be successful, we need to have confidence in this area. This isn't taught much in school or at home, as I said. If we have dreams and goals, chances are we're going to need good people skills and relationships, right? Whatever they might be. How would you like to be remembered? I think, who do we most admire in life? They typically have, they're good with relationships, right? So, like I said, refer to part 1, which is kind of foundational for this idea of people skills and relationships. And then this one, as it turns out, we're going to get into some dealing with challenging people or conflict resolution, things like that. So if you watch some of the podcasts before the lesson, you would have come across Henry Cloud. Henry Cloud is very famous. He's an awesome guy. I've subscribed to his free emails, so I get these little video clips, these 2 or 3 minute video clips that I included with the lesson. Just came from his free emails, just as examples that I thought were reasonably good. So he wrote the book with a guy named Townsend many, many years ago, at least 20 years ago, called Boundaries. It's a historic book, and it's about relationships and boundaries in our relationships, and even today we'll talk about boundaries a little bit. So he's a really well-known, popular guy. I've read a couple of his books, and he's awesome. So these 3 videos, the first one, the best relationships start with these 4 things. So that's kind of his perspective on this idea of happiness, fulfillment in life. We need 4 things. He said connectedness, which is giving and receiving love, essentially. Freedom to live how we like to live, as opposed to being in some kind of prison or controlled. The ability to metabolize negative things, that's a huge part of what he talks about. The ability to metabolize negative things, like a failure or a rejection. How do we do it? He used the example in the video of if he gave a talk and his team member comes to him and says, I don't think what you said there went over very well. And he'd say, hopefully he would say, thank you, it's good to know that. We'll take that out for next time. That would be metabolizing a negative feedback in a positive way. And obviously you need to be a level of confidence, and we'll talk about that, to be able to metabolize negative things. And to use our talents. That's one of the things he also says that we need to be able to use our talents to something productive. That was the first one. The second one, how to deal with controlling people. Now we're getting to the meat of the matter. His answer was, first thing you do is you convert them into a frustrated person, instead of a controlling person, by just saying no. He says they can't be controlling if we don't cooperate. They're just trying to control us, so no longer a controlling person. But we also, in order to be able to do that, he talked about it, to be able to say no. We need to get over our hang-ups about what other people think, which is this fear of rejection. This idea comes up over and over again. Thirdly, his third little video there, why we hang on to toxic people. We may have done that. We may know people who've done that. We scratch our head. Why are they still hanging out with these or that toxic person? And he says we often have a subconscious fear of rejection or of being alone. Rick Warren, who we'll come to in a second, he loves to talk about how fear of rejection is the most common fear that us humans deal with. So if we know that, we can recognize that in ourselves and in others and realize what's happening. So we often have a subconscious fear of rejection or of being alone. Therefore, first strategy is the buddy system he talked about. We need some good people around us like at launch class, we're going to encourage each other, and we're going to be there for each other, so that we won't be alone if we go and challenge a relationship and get rejected. So we won't have that fear of being alone. So that's Henry Cloud. There's 4 different examples in this lesson. Henry Cloud is one. The next one is these doctors, Andrea and Jonathan Taylor Cummings. That was the TED Talk. That was part of the lesson. And so this will be their perspective, and then it'll be Rick Warren, I mentioned it a second ago, and then there's another one. So 4 different perspectives on essentially a similar concept. So you'll see some overlap, but this is just a powerful resource that you can use going forward if you have challenging relationships, something to refer to. Lots of resources there, some websites, things like that. So these 2, I'm going to guess counselors, psychologists, they talk about 4 habits of all successful relationships. Now they are talking about, in their story, if you remember, about a married couple, who was essentially, done. The marriage was done. And she talked about how it can actually be almost life and death, because after they had met with this couple a couple times, I think it was the woman said, I was ready to commit suicide. That's how bad it was. They saved their life. So these 4 examples, I think number 1 and 3 are very similar, but be curious, not critical. Obviously, critical is the hard part. Really easy to criticize. There's, as I said in part 1 of this lesson, there's next to no value in criticizing others. It's the easiest thing to do. There's no value in criticizing others. What they recommend here is be curious instead of critical. Invest the time to understand the other person. And what they found in their marriage, play to each other's strengths instead of getting frustrated. And number 3, ask, don't assume. Same idea. Assuming usually comes across as disrespectful. We don't like people making assumptions about us. Get good at having these, quote, courageous conversations in a safe environment without judging. So once we have a relationship and we've talked about it and we've agreed we're not going to judge each other, we're not going to criticize each other, now we have a safe environment, right? Now we can be comfortable talking about things. And number 2 is a good example. Be careful not crushing. In other words, when we're approaching somebody in a relational challenge, care about them. Always be focused on them. What's happening for them. Try to understand. Care about the other person instead of being self-focused, i.e. I'm angry or something like that. And I mentioned, you'll see overlap between all 4 of these examples, and that's a common one. Lastly, connect before you correct. Communicate value and appreciation, and less about our need to criticize. In other words, make sure we're good in our relationship, in our, they call it the love bank, where we're feeling good about the relationship before we try to add these challenging things. And they talk about always nature made. Make sure you keep focused on why we're together. This is a marriage type one, but in general, connect. In other words, have a relationship before we challenge others. They won't take it very well. So there's 2 slides about Rick Warren. Rick Warren is my favorite teacher in the world. I listen to his Daily Hope podcast every day driving to work. This is his famous book, Purpose-Driven Life. This book is the best-selling book in history after the Bible, apparently. And apparently Rick and his wife, Kay, they give away, I think he said, 91% of their income. They're wealthy people. They give away 91% of their income. He said, and this is just a sidebar, he said that God knew, God gave him the inspiration, he says, to write this book, and God knew he's going to make a lot of money. God knew, he says, God knew he could trust me with money because he knew what he was going to do with it. Interesting little sidebar there, right? So, Purpose-Driven Life, life-changing book. It was for me. Awesome book. So here's what Rick Warren says in his little lesson called Keeping the Crazy Makers from Making You Crazy. So this is what we're talking about today. The crazy makers in our life. And so this is the definition, his definition, of crazy makers. They all start with D. He loves to do this alliteration. He's got so many different acronyms for trying to remember things. So define crazy makers. They're demanding. It's another way of saying controlling. We know people like that. It's human nature. We want things our way, right? Hopefully we mature and grow out of that, but not all of us do. Not everybody does. We still have that tendency, right, to want to control our situation, to control others. Disapproving, deafening, which means loud or angry, destructive or hurtful. Discontented and demeaning, putting us down. How much do we like to be around those kind of people? And often they don't know that they're being that way or that they're affecting us that way. And that's part of the strategy of dealing with these people is trying to understand what they're dealing with, where they're coming from. So that's the definition. What does Rick Warren say as far as how to deal with the crazy makers? He's got 6 points. How to deal with the crazy makers in our life. First, refuse to be offended. Make a decision. I just heard this 3 weeks ago. I thought it was really good. Refuse to be offended. Make a decision today that I'm not going to be offended by anybody. I'm not going to let them have power over my emotions, over my life. We can do that. We can just make that decision. I refuse to get offended. They say something disrespectful or rude next time? Oh, that's interesting. Instead of getting angry. Easier said than done, right? Look past the behavior to the pain in their life or past. In other words, like that previous couple said, care about them. Look past the objectionable behavior to care about the person. Where is this behavior coming from? Rick Warren loves to say, hurt people, hurt people. In other words, if they're hurting us, chances are they're hurting or they've been hurt, right? This is the idea of be the bigger person, look past the offense, and try to understand where they're coming from. First thing, refuse to be offended. Second, don't wait for an apology to forgive them. Easier said than done. But sometimes if we want them to do something like apologize, we might wait forever. They might die before they apologize. So it's not healthy to live that way, so just make a decision. I forgive them. Whether you tell them or not, just make a decision. I forgive them. I'm not going to carry that baggage. Third, refuse to gossip about them. That's a hard one. Refuse to gossip about them. We really want to tell others about our painful situation, about this knucklehead, or these knuckleheads that we're dealing with, right? Refuse to gossip. It's very hurtful to gossip. Fourth, refuse to play their game. In other words, don't respond in kind. If they are rude or disrespectful, don't be rude or disrespectful back. Now we're at their level. Choose to be the bigger person and say, I'm not going to, stoop to that level, I think is the term that's often used. So don't respond in kind. The last one talks about this point too. Don't be disrespectful. So fifth, refuse to cave in. In other words, you don't have to roll over and be a doormat, give it to their demands, right? Refuse to cave in. If it's unreasonable, you don't have to. They're trying to, like Dr. Henry Cloud said, they're trying to, but we don't have to, give in. Lastly, always take the high ground, as number 4 talked about. In other words, always be respectful. I learned this many, many years ago. The Bible talks about that as being, it actually says kind and respectful always. But the easy one to remember is respectful. Always respectful, no exceptions ever. There's no circumstance, if you think it through, where we need to be disrespectful. So that's Rick Warren, keeping the crazy makers from making you crazy. Lastly, 7 biblical steps for resolving conflict. And you'll recognize some of these because we've already just talked about them. But like I say, this is a resource that we can come back to. There's some references to the Bible here. We can go study on our own. Or actually in your small groups, we could do that later. So 7 biblical steps for resolving conflict. First, take the initiative. And that relates to our diagram, life choices diagram in the 7 areas. Take the initiative. In other words, instead of turning left, you're going to have to be that way. And avoiding the conflict, turn right and go towards the challenge, towards the conflict, towards the person, towards, this is relationship, so be towards the person. Take the initiative. And part 1 of this lesson 2, we talked about who should take the initiative. When you're having a conflict with somebody, who should make the first move? You're both. We're both. I think the other person's being, whatever, right? Bad words. We both think the other person's off the wall and totally wrong. What do? This is an important relationship, right? We can't just write off relationship after relationship after relationship. We're not going to be happy, right? What should we do? Take the initiative. Who should do it? It's kind of a funny answer. The mature one. How about that? So put up our hands. I'll be the mature one. Don't rub it in their faces. But yes, that's what it comes down to. Someone has to take the initiative and look and say, well, can I perhaps apologize for what was my part in this, even if it's only a little part. Take the initiative. And like the other ones talked about, seek to understand where they're coming from. Just talking about, even just understanding without trying to resolve things. The issue itself, just seeking to understand, it goes a long way. So first, take the initiative. 2, focus on goals bigger than your personal differences. Obviously, if you're in a relationship, a committed relationship, those are goals much, much bigger. Family, etc. Harmony and unity in our family. Those are goals much bigger than our current personal differences, our current issue, our current difference of opinion. Focus on goals bigger than your personal differences. 3rd, listen attentively as the other person tells how he or she sees the situation. That's that seek to understand thing. In my experience, when I've done that, I always learn something. And I always end up having more compassion and moves towards resolution. So listen attentively. Validate the person's feelings without minimizing his or her concerns. I'm not sure fully what that means, quite frankly. Validate the person's feelings. Understand. That makes sense. That sounds reasonable to feel that way. I don't know how that would be minimizing, but without minimizing. I think that sometimes means without making excuses on our own part. Just listen and validate without making excuses. Tell your story. Communicate feelings without blaming them. This one's highlighted too. Take initiative as highlighted. Communicate feelings without blaming others. Great. You know, we don't hear this growing up. Most people go through most of their life without ever hearing this simple idea. Communicate feelings without blaming others. In other words, you're in a relationship and you really want to say, you did this and you made me feel awful. Pointing fingers, right? That's the idea. Don't point fingers. Don't blame the other person. Our tendency as humans, we want to blame everything but ourselves. So the idea here is we communicate how we feel. I feel whatever I feel. When you did this, I don't understand fully why, but I feel this. Can we talk about it? You know, we're not blaming when we do that. Number 6, apologize and ask forgiveness for your part in the disagreement. I guess we talked about that earlier. Or maybe it was with Rick Warren. I'm not even sure. Anyway, this is a common theme. Apologize, ask for forgiveness for our part. This is the take initiative one. This is what we can always do. What's our part in it? Apologize for that part. Take some initiative in that. And there's a big old Bible reference there. Lastly, discuss how to avoid future conflicts. So learn, I mean, we can learn this in courses. We'll be learning some of this today. Talk ahead of time. We know we're going to have conflict. How are we going to deal with it? Some of the rules of fight fair. Might have heard that idea. How do we fight fair without being disrespectful, without being rude, without putting other people down, without blaming? How can we do this so that we can focus on the relationship and keep the relationship as what's important? And know that we are both coming at this thing. We want what's good for the other person. If we both have that attitude, we want the other person to be happy, the other person to be successful. If we really do care and sincerely want that, then we'll usually come at it from a good angle, right? I think that's it. Okay, so we're going to break into small groups here in a sec. These are the questions for discussion. Start with taking turns sharing with each other some of what you've learned today and what you liked about today's lesson. Most importantly, take turns sharing with each other some of our specific situations with difficult people in our life. It really helps to talk with other people about these things and to be heard. And then, even better, to say, with what I learned today, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go talk to that person. And I'm going to apologize, or I'm going to at least take some initiative. Because when you talk about it and you say you're going to do it, and you've got some, a support group, small groups are phenomenal for that. Just articulating and sharing, supporting each other, praying for each other. So small group is half the benefit of launch class. Half is the educational side, but really we learn in small groups and that mutual support. That's what Dr. Cloud talked about. You have a support group. And can you think of anyone else who might benefit from this message? Perhaps share it with them. Send them the link. That's what we want to try to do, right? Help others. Join the launch class mission to improve our society. That's what we're trying to accomplish. Teaching things that aren't typically taught in school or at home. And grow yourself, tell others about it, be part of the solution of making Calgary and Alberta better. So next week's lesson will probably be in about 2 weeks. Check on the website, register for the blog so you get notifications. And yeah, let's go to part 2. Let's break for small groups. Thanks, guys.